My name is Saskia Fagan. I'm the Public Engagement Manager for the Innocence Project of Florida, and I'll be guiding us through today's conversation. I'm really excited and grateful to be in this space tonight. One of the beautiful pieces of my work is that I get to build relationships with organizations doing such impactful work and just have these kinds of conversations where we honestly reflect on where we are and strategize around how we build something beautiful together. I'm truly inspired by the work the folks who will be sharing with you tonight are doing, and it's my hope that you will leave the space with renewed energy to use whatever gifts, talents, and time you have to be a part of this work in whatever way you are called to be. Thank you for showing up today and being in community with us. There is so much going on and so much required of us each and every day to survive and hopefully thrive. So we don't take it lightly that you have decided to be here with us tonight. Before we begin and I introduce our incredible speakers, I want to invite us to take a collective breath. This is heavy and human work, and we're just encouraging folks to hold space for the history that brought us here, while also making room for possibility as we move through the conversation today. I want to start us off with a sort of grounding with these two excerpts from What It Takes to Heal by Prentice Hemphill, which is currently a piece I keep coming back to. It's a powerful exploration of how personal and collective healing are intertwined with the pursuit of justice. And it's kind of what we're here to do today, to explore healing, accountability, community care, and radical imagination. So, healing or care is still essential for guiding the how of what we build, the visions for the world, and the principle for how we navigate the challenges therein. When we commit to social change, we remember that systems can perpetuate and create harm, or they can foster healing and resilience. Healing is necessary for us to care for our lives and how we feel in them, and it's especially potent when coupled with our action and engagement in something bigger than us. So it is not one or the other, healing ourselves or ending oppression. We have to engage in both. And with that, I'll move us into some reminders for the space. As much as you can, I encourage you to be as present as possible tonight while also doing what you need to do to take care of yourself. Please engage in the chat with questions and thoughts while ensuring that you are respectful to others. Towards the end, we will ensure to make room for Q&A. So as things come up, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we have someone on the team who will be monitoring that. Um, and with that, our first speaker introduction for tonight is Mona. Mona is the Director of Advocacy and Campaigns at Equal Justice USA. She works with the staff and partners to reduce the harm of the current system and build transformational solutions to violence. Her work supports campaigns and organizing to end extreme sentences, build community-centered solutions to violence, and create systemic solutions for safe communities. She uses her expertise in the community-based organizing and policy change to provide training, strategic guidance, and hands-on assistance to state and local legislative campaigns across the country. Before joining EJUSA in 2009, Mona spent 10 years with Amnesty International, supporting human rights and campaigners across the globe to build grassroots power, educate, and implement human rights-centered policy. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, Mona, and you can introduce yourself way better than I ever could.
Thank you. And thanks so much for the invitation. I'm really honored to be sitting here with my fellow colleagues on this panel. And what would I add? I'm a Chicana. I'm an auntie to 6 nieces and nephews, and I think they are the ones who I do my work for. They're, ages 2 up to 13, and it's been really both beautiful and incredible to watch them grow and to come into themselves. And I really just hope that we can leave a world that is a little bit less unjust so that their path through the world is just a slightly gentler than it is right now.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And we have Seth Miller. Seth Miller litigates post-conviction innocence cases and regularly lectures to students, lawyers, and community groups on issues related to wrongful convictions. He also teaches post-conviction remedies and an adjunct professor at the Florida State University College of Law and Stetson University College of Law. Seth was president of the Innocence Network. And served as its executive board member from 2012 to 2021. Seth also served as chair of the steering committee for the American Bar Association Death Penalty Due Process Review Project. Before joining IPF in 2006, Seth served as a project attorney with the ABA Death Penalty Moratorium Implementation Project in DC and was a staff attorney with the First District Court of Appeal in Tallahassee, Florida.
Thanks, Saskia, and thank you to all the panelists and for putting this together. I think when I think about as a grounding statement, what brings me to the work, I always wanted to represent people, to work with people, to be in the trenches. And when our organization started in 2003, the landscape of folks who were working on wrongful convictions was much narrower. So there was a huge need. But as we've grown and been able to free lots of wrongfully convicted people, and far more people are want to do this work and be in the trenches, I've really shifted my focus, I think, to how we can better provide transition assistance to folks who are free from wrongful convictions, so they can, transition into free society, reintegrate into free society more successfully, and most importantly, apropos to this conversation, to heal from the trauma of wrongful conviction and wrongful incarceration. And I do it much like what Mona said, because I have a son who I want him to live in a better world than the one that we're living in now. I want to always work to strive to improve the spaces that we're living in and instill in him a sense of justice.
Beautiful. And we're grateful to have Michael. Michael Mendoza is Latino Justice's National Criminal Justice Director based in Sacramento, California. At 15, Michael was transferred to adult court and sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. While incarcerated, Michael turned his life around and focused on healing and education to become the person he wanted to be. Changes in California's state law gave Michael the opportunity to demonstrate that he matured into a healthy and pro-social adult. Michael earned his release in 2014 after 17 years of incarceration. He immediately began advocating for juvenile and criminal justice and earned his BA degree in political science from San Francisco State University. Throughout his career, Michael has helped pass over 24 pieces of legislation in California and other states across the country, testifying and advocating for key changes to law. His favorite bill to work on was SB 1391, which made California the first state in the country to prohibit 14 and 15-year-old kids from being transferred to adult court in 2018. Thank you so much for being here, Michael.
Thank you, Saskia. I think you just answered my question for me. Those are the reasons why I am here and why I am so passionate about this work. Growing up in Southern California during the mid 1990s, and making that worst decision that ended up me growing up in prison for 17 years. At that point, I never thought I was going to go home. I thought I was going to die in prison, but because a change in law, because policy saved my life, I fell in love with policy and I wanted to learn about policy and how to continue to change policy so we can give other people the exact same hope. But I just learned so much while I was serving my sentence in California state prisons related to hope, mercy, forgiveness, redemption. And these are things that I hope we can continue to talk about, and as a moral standard to how we hold people accountable and how we change the system towards something that's more humane and safe for everyone involved. So thank you for having me here.
Beautiful. Thank you, Michael. And we're grateful to have Josh Schmidtman. who is the Senior Policy Counselor at the Bail Project. Before joining the Bail Project, he served as Director of Federal Legislative Affairs at Families Against Mandatory Minimums, where he advocated for federal sentencing reform and decarceration alongside families of incarcerated loved ones. Prior to joining FAM, Josh was an Equal Justice Works Fellow for the Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth, where he focused on reforming state parole systems and securing the early release of those given extreme sentences in their youth. Josh received his JD from the Georgetown University Law Center and his BA in political science and philosophy from the University of Maryland. Thank you for being with us tonight, Josh.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I, mirror everyone else's comments about really being honored to be here. And um, you know, I the only thing I would add here is like for me, it's this is such an important conversation because for me, part of what's so important about doing this work is really doing it in having advocacy work grow out of what's really happening on the ground and working with people who are sort of seeing what's happening firsthand and know the system. It's easy enough for me to say, read a bill and say, oh, I think, or read a statute and say, I think this would be better if it was written this way instead. But it's anyone who works in this field, I think it's immediately becomes apparent that um, sitting in your living room reading a statute is not nearly the same as um, seeing how the system is actually working in practice. And so I just think this conversation is such an important part of what that all looks like, figuring out how to turn that sort of that truth and that trauma and how to turn that into real change in the world. And that's always been such an important part of why I want to do this work. So really grateful to be here and excited for the conversation.
Beautiful. Yeah. Beautiful answers and whys from all of y'all. And I'm really grateful to be in this space tonight. Um, Getting into the breadth of this conversation, I would love for y'all to provide some context for folks on the call. So we know the systems we're up against don't just incarcerate, they traumatize, they isolate, they disrupt. And we want to take a few moments to explore how systemic injustice has evolved and how it continues to shape our communities today. Kind of taking a look at the historical roots of the carceral system, how those legacies persist, and what foundational truths we must confront in order to move forward sustainably together, all those things. So just as a kind of beginning to the conversation, and whoever feels led to answer first can. But what are the historical roots of our current carceral system, and how are they still shaping policies and public attitudes today?
I'm happy to start. So I think we can absolutely trace a direct line from slavery to Jim Crow to our current system of policing and punishment. And I think this really bears out when we start looking at who is policed, who is punished, and who is executed. Like to unroll that a little bit, and I'm going to focus on the death penalty just because it's just what I know best. But we know that discrimination on capital punishment was explicitly written into many states' laws during slavery, and Black people, whether they were enslaved or not, faced the death penalty for crimes that were not even eligible for death if the same crime was committed by a white person. We know that in the decades after the Civil War, lynching peaked and it really became a terrorizing form of extrajudicial executions carried out largely against Black people, Mexican people. Lynching started to decline in the first part of the 20th century, but we see that decline because that's when executions, legal, state-sanctioned legal executions became much more common. So basically just replacing lynching as a tool of racial violence. And I think even just like a case in point, a former governor of Arkansas, George Hayes, wrote in 1927 that quote, states needed the death penalty to address what he called the Negro problem. It's very, very well documented, the path from discrimination straight from slavery to today. Even looking in 1910 to 1950, 75% of people who executed were Black people. And even in the modern era, if we look at studies across states, California, Ohio, Georgia, even Florida, Maryland, we found that people convicted of murdering white people were many, many more times likely to be sentenced to death. I think the more we dig into the numbers and the impacts, we just start to see that systemic injustice is just baked into our carceral system. And I'm sure some of the lawyers here could also lean in even a little bit more to the ways in which courts, the US Supreme Court, have acknowledged that racial bias is okay. I know many of us know about McCleskey v. Kemp, where basically the Supreme Court said, yeah, it's okay. So I think that line, in my mind, is very bright and very strong.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just happen to jump off that. And, I was thinking as you were talking about the Baldus study, which is what was the focus of McCleskey v. Kemp, where they had this preeminent study that showed precisely what you're talking about, that there was disproportionate impact on Black men, particularly getting the death penalty where the victims were white, as opposed to people getting the death penalty where victims were Black, suggesting that systems favored, or valued white lives of victims more than they did of Black lives, and had a disproportionate impact on Black individuals receiving the death penalty and also being executed. And that was clear as day. And the Supreme Court said, hey, we don't care about these statistics, right? We care about, you have to be able to show us overt discrimination in individual cases. It has to be case specific, and they rejected that claim. We see racial discrimination in sort of every single part of the criminal justice system and criminal justice process, particularly from jury selection cases. It took until 1986 for the Supreme Court to say, hey, we have to create a rule to make it unconstitutional to strike Black jurors because they're Black, right? And and I think it was 2009 or 2010, Equal Justice Initiative of Alabama did an individual case study where they went to courthouses all over the Deep South to see how that rule was operating in practice. And they found that while this rule, which was upheld to try to prevent racial discrimination in jury selections, was still being used to prevent Black people from serving on juries. So instead of, like, for example, I'm getting rid of this person because they're Black, and getting rid of this person because I don't like the way they walk, I don't like the way they talk, I don't like their hairstyle, I don't like what neighborhood they're from. These sort of race neutral reasons that were just pretexts in order to eliminate Black folks from juries. So it not only had the actual impact of making it such that Black folks who are over policed and are just disproportionately represented as the people moving through the criminal justice system, those folks didn't have peers on their juries. It made it so that Black folks don't want to serve on juries. I talked to my colleagues who are criminal defense attorneys here in town in Tallahassee, Florida. And look, we have a hard time getting Black folks in town here to show up to jury selection. And when you focus group, when you poll on that issue, because they know they're going to be struck, don't want to come, right? And so right from the beginning of a criminal trial, the thing that's most important to protect the rights of an individual from being wrongfully convicted, or being convicted and over sentenced, being wrongfully sentenced to death, it's impossible almost to get a jury of your peers.
Yeah, I mean, I can hop in here. I think so obviously I'm from the bail project, so I'll probably filter a lot of this through the sort of bail reform lens. But I think this is I think it's an interesting example of a similar sort of idea where it's a part of the system that is rooted in, and we know in practice, it is a tool to sort of enforce racial violence and increase incarceration. But I think if you look at the history too, it's really informative to see how the legal system has sort of built it up as a tool for increased use of as a mechanism for detention, as a mechanism for this kind of improper use and discriminatory impact. So, if you look at, I mean, for folks who people probably know, but like, cash bail, basically, if you're arrested, a judge can set a dollar amount that you have to pay to be released from jail while awaiting trial. That's cash bail. Um, the way that it was originally meant to work, at our founding, and this comes from English common law and American colonial legal systems, bail was only meant to bail was designed as a system to actually ensure release rather than prevent it. And it actually used to be the case that just a promise to pay the bail amount rather than actually having to put up cash up front was sufficient for release. The design of it in theory is that people are meant to actually be able to afford cash bail when it's set. It's meant to be tailored to what somebody can actually really meaningfully afford, and then be released while their case moves forward. And there's this idea, even though we know this isn't true, but there's this idea that they're putting something up at stake to ensure that they come back to trial, right? But over years, over time, the legal system has sort of increased its ability to be used as a mechanism just for de facto detention. And so, whether it's the Supreme Court or state laws across the country, a lot of which in the late 1900s were enacted. It's now, rather than just being a mechanism for release, rather than just being having bail set based on what can somebody afford that we think is going to be a stake for them to come back to court, it's increasingly become the case that judges are looking more to public safety concerns. They're looking more to just the perception of, do I think this person is a threat to the community? And as you can imagine, like, the more and more that becomes a part of the equation, the more those decisions are informed by not even evidence, but a judge's gut feeling, which is often informed by racial bias. And so we know, across the country, in every state I've looked at, the people of color face higher bail amounts than people who are white. And it's largely because of the subjective nature of how it gets applied. And on top of that, the affordability element of it has totally gone out the window, right? And so for context, like, the average bail amount for a misdemeanor is about $500. And I think a lot of judges from a position of privilege think, oh, $500, that's a low amount. I just set bail last week for $10,000. 500 is nothing. But the reality is nearly 40% of Americans can't afford a $400 emergency expense, right? There are millions and millions of people who couldn't scrape together the $500 if they needed to. But that reality is gets kind of lost in the conversation. So it's one of these things where the something that was sort of broken by design the broken nature of it has been sort of leveraged by the legal system more and more over time to make it more and more harmful.
Yeah, I'm just gonna agree with my colleagues. They've expressed a lot of important factors in terms of the historical context of our criminal justice system, and I'll just agree and say our current criminal justice system is an example, or is, modern day slavery. During the mid 1990s, when I was incarcerated, we had President Clinton and Republicans calling Black and brown children super predators, kids that were going to go on a killing spree because we were supposedly godless, fatherless monsters. And the laws during those times were really, really disproportionately held against Black and brown youth. And so those are examples of how, our criminal laws are still being used as tools to really disproportionately hold people accountable, especially Black and brown people. I was one of them. And we still are seeing that today, as we see, a lot of our Latino community being criminalized and called criminal just for crossing the border for safety. And so we still have this really dehumanizing messaging coupled with, unjust laws that disproportionately hold people accountable, all as evidence of, how our system is modern day slavery. I mean, even while I was serving my time, one of the things I wanted to do was pay my restitution and make sure that, my victim's family were receiving every single dollar I owed them, even though it wasn't going to bring back their son. But yet I was only able to make 8 cents an hour while working in prison. And so, there's just a lot of little things that are so dehumanizing about incarceration, that don't do nothing to help people rehabilitate or heal, from the harms they've committed or have been harmed against. And so there's definitely a lot of examples of how our current prison system, um, is a modern day slavery, is very inhumane and does nothing, for public safety.
Yeah, I'm really appreciating that y'all are kind of hitting on different aspects of the impact of the system, on communities, on people, on the work in general. And there are sometimes these opposing narratives that make us kind of think like we're further than we actually are. And I'm just wondering how these kinds of narratives are like, what are the things that y'all find yourself challenging most often? Like, what are the misconceptions or dominant narratives that you're fighting against within your work?
I'll just say something really for me, the one hardest thing that I come up against all the time is that people don't deserve to come home, that people, don't deserve second chances, that there's no sense of hope or freedom for them. And for me, that's a very dehumanizing narrative and message that we are really, missing the mark on and trying to hit a moral narrative here, which is, people do deserve second chances. We're all human beings. And so for me, I think just starting off with the very dehumanizing message, that really comes from folks not understanding the lived experiences of people before they even commit a crime. And so I think the most challenging narrative that or I kind of constantly find myself, discussing is that, everybody is worthy of redemption, and locking people up for the rest of their lives, or, sending them to the death penalty actually makes it harder, to improve public safety, and just give people a moral lesson around, we don't want vengeance. We want the opportunity to be able to prove that people can change and come home better people so they can be better citizens, for society. And so constantly challenging a hateful and vengeful message is tough, because everybody just falls in different places on that. So even in our own end, even within our own community, right? We're quick to say, yeah, let's lock them up for something unjust that they've done. And so it's just trying to constantly find the middle balance and middle ground on, how do we hold people accountable, but in a very humane way, and not so, um, long of sentences.
I mean, Michael, really struck me what you talked about you, uh, government using the institution and enhancement of criminal laws as tools to dehumanize people. I mean, I spend, thankfully, not most of my time, but still enough of my time over at the legislature during legislative session. I'll have things that we're working on, but I get to sit through committee hearings. And because, we're a criminal justice organization, we're in judiciary and criminal justice, and these committees that are, hearing all of these bills. I mean, I've been doing it for 20 years. Every session, there are dozens and dozens of bills where new things are crimes, and things that have been crimes get longer sentences, or they come up with some new sentencing enhancement that gives the ability to give a mandatory life sentence. And I gotta say that, and look, I know a lot of legislators, and there are good people who are working over there who are thoughtful people. I'm thoughtful about lots of issues, but when it comes to a lot of these things, I'm not sure that folks spend a lot of time thinking about them. Um, you know, I can't vote against that bill because then I'll be caricatured in a certain way, but by um, the groupthink that comes along with just voting these things through and pushing them through without really thinking about the consequences on people and families and communities, um, uh, is itself a caricature of the people who are impacted by it, that they're all monsters, right? But we all know from working with people who have moved through the system, who are in prison, working with their families, that um, you know, people aren't who they were on their worst day, right? People are complicated, they make mistakes, and it seems like we're going in the wrong direction in terms of trying to figure out a way to, um, you know, instead of trying to add more humanity to the system, we're taking it away. And you had mentioned something about immigration. I think it's worth mentioning, although it's not the criminal legal system, it's an adjacent system. But my hope is it feels like we're in a dog catching the car moment with immigration a little bit, where people are finally realizing, like, what is the definition of a criminal, right? Um, it's like now it's not even someone who really breaks laws, right? It's just someone who has committed a civil infraction by coming over the border illegally, who's lived here as a law-abiding resident for 30 years, who's Carroll in Missouri, right, in your town, and now everybody's up in arms because they're trying to deport Carroll from Missouri. And so I think what that tells us is that people don't oftentimes think about things that aren't beyond what's right in front of them, and people unfortunately need to have some like visceral impact in their direct space from these policies in order to bring them home and to allow the subjects who are impacted by these policies the humanity and the dignity they deserve. And so as bad as things are, my hope is that, and they're likely to get worse, and despite everyone's effort to fend them off, my hope is that people finally will realize that these are tools of oppression. And it doesn't matter whether you think they're for these other people. As Saskia, as you said, if one person's not free, none of us are free, right? As your slide before, they impact all of us. And the more people can realize that, the better off we'll be.
To build on what both of you have said, one of the things that we talk about is that out in the world, one of the big narratives is that justice is punishment. And so part of our work that we see is about shifting that definition of punishment. But it is deep, 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 this idea that justice is punishment, from parenting strategies all the way to, executing people. And, Michael, you mentioned politicians talking about super predators in the 90s, which came out of the 1994 crime bill, which was, a Bill Clinton, that was a Democratic policy, rolls through. And so to this idea that justice is punishment, as opposed to justice being, the presence of healing, safety, and accountability, is I think a really big gulf that we, at least that many organizations are working to cross that in a lot of different ways. To offer a little bit of hope, like I think there has been some slight movement on that, and thinking, in 30 years ago, you literally couldn't walk into a legislator's office and talk about the death penalty. In 1999, some colleagues of mine were literally tossed out of the Senate president's office in Maryland, a bright, bright blue state, for talking about the death penalty. Fast forward 30 years, right now we're, since in that time, gosh, 15 states have ended the death penalty. And we're starting, the US has gone from 75% of the country thinking the death penalty is great to now about 53%. And we know that less than half of young people actually support the death penalty. But that is just like one teeny tiny bit. And it doesn't even, I think, impact that bigger, broader nut, because even if people are willing to say that they don't support the death penalty, there's still this backsplash to, but long sentences are still okay. Solitary confinement is still okay. So for us, I think that is one of the biggest things that we have been working to impact, is this idea that out in the world that justice is punishment, because it is the foundation of all those hours in judiciary committees. So, I think Seth and Michael, as we've all sat in those state legislative meetings, right? When bills are about to be passed that lessen criminal punishment, what does the opposition do? They sit and they use the language of fear. They'll read terrible descriptions of crimes for it as a way to continue to rise legislators' fear and to just knee jerk into this idea that the only way we get justice is punishment. And I think one of the things that we've learned just even doing our work around ending the death penalty, and as we do more in community safety, is that like that's actually not gonna it's not going to impact violence. It's not going to interrupt violence. It's only adding more harm and more violence out into the world.
Well, I'm glad I waited to go last because I think my my thought sort of dovetails nicely from that, which is a really similar idea, but it's this we come up against it a lot, which is this idea that so many different elements of so many different punitive elements or just generally like different oppressive functions of the system are really sold as, and I think a lot of people believe them to be promoting public safety, even though they oftentimes are totally disconnected from public safety in the first place, even a sort of like colloquial understanding of public safety. But then on top of that, there's this sort of misconception about what does public safety really mean, right? Um, so like I'll talk about this in the context of cash bail as an example, but I think this is really prevalent when it comes to right like lengthy sentences or the death penalty or policing. Like this is across the system with public safety gets thrown around as a phrase that seems like a catch-all sort of, when in reality it's often things that are motivated not by public safety but by retribution or a desire to oppress or control, right? Um, and so for the example of cash bail, we often people talk about, oh, we need cash bail because this is a an essential tool for us to promote public safety in the pretrial system. Um, but you think about it for even a little bit, it's like, well, this is not a tool for public safety, right? These are what it means when cash bail gets assigned. Um, Two different people, same circumstances, charged with the same crime, but one person has $10,000 in their bank account, and the other person has $10 in their bank account. The person with $10,000 is going to go home. The other person is going to sit in jail while they wait trial, or they're going to have to go to a bail bonds agent and get themselves into a cycle of financial insecurity through that. What that means is those pretrial decisions aren't being made on the basis of evidence or public safety or anything like that. They're made on the basis of who has the most money in their bank account, right? Um, and so, I think there's a perception that, oh, well, this results in people ending up in jail. That means it's a tool for public safety, but it's not. When it's not targeted, when it's not sort of designed with that in mind. You lose the connection there really quickly. But then, right, the flip side of this is it actually harms public safety, right? I mean, there's the more obvious maybe example of when somebody who is detained in jail, particularly somebody who doesn't need to be, um, the destabling impact of that itself is criminogenic, right? That person is more likely then to be forced into situations where they come into contact with the criminal justice system again in the future. But I think even more broadly, like if I'm detained in jail and I lose my job because I had to miss 2 weeks of shifts, and I come home and I can't put food on my table, I can't feed my kids, that's a public safety issue, right? If I can't get food on the table for my family, that's public safety as well. But that's not how it gets talked about. It's always talked about in reference to well, these the rates of crime and by these predetermined metrics. But it's I guess that's sort of the misconception is a lack of imagination as to what it actually means to be safe.
Yeah. I'm appreciating that y'all have all kind of hit on different pieces and narratives that have kind of brought us to where we are. And I don't want to move us too quickly because I do think this context is really important. So if there are more pieces that are coming up that y'all think is really important to kind of set the stage for the next piece of the conversation, I just want to open the floor for that. Okay. All right. Yeah. So shifting gears a little bit and taking a bit of a closer look at what the work looks like within each organization. I think one of the like really powerful aspects about approaching this conversation from both policy and community-based efforts is that each of us are contributing in different ways toward this like shared vision, purpose, and like mission for why each organization exists. And it reveals like a really rich diversity of approaches. So we want to explore that a bit and point to like real world examples or case studies of like what this looks like within wherever these different organizations are based and yeah, explore that a bit. So giving the mic to Michael to explain that from the aspect of Latino justice and the work that's moving forward there.
Yeah, thank you, Saskia. I think one of the examples that I can give around this is our one of our attempts to build off of a law that allowed me to come home in California, which is youth offender parole. And so in 2013, several organizations passed a bill, SB 260, which created youth offender parole. And it allowed people under the age of 18 who, when they committed their crime, an opportunity to be reviewed after 15, 20, 25 years, instead of waiting 70, 80, 100 years when they saw their parole board, and show and prove that we weren't those same kids anymore. This was in 2013, and since then we were able to expand that bill to reach age 25. And so now in California, if you were 25 or younger when you committed the crime and received a life sentence or a de facto life sentence, you are eligible for what's called a youth offender parole board hearing. Um, this year, we attempted to include people that are serving life without parole, but were also 25 years of age or younger. Um, and I'll just say it was a really tough road. We successfully passed through the Senate side of our session in our capital. But we quickly faced a lot of opposition that Mona, I know you're very familiar with, um, from Crimes Victim United, et cetera. And so we decided to take a pause so that we can be better prepared on how we're going to address, a lot of the fear mongering and really vengeful and negative pushback on why, especially young people should deserve a second chance. And from a trauma-informed lens, I'll just say that what we are doing to kind of prepare for that in this next battle, if you will, is, at Latino Justice, we believe that those who have been personally impacted and have been incarcerated have powerful stories and experience to share. Um, so, for example, when I came home, I didn't know how to pass a bill, what policy meant. And so now we try to really engage our community by teaching them how a bill is passed. It goes through several committees, it goes through sessions, the governor signs and approves it, etc. But we want to teach, especially formerly incarcerated people, how to civically engage. Because I personally believe that when you teach somebody how to civically engage, tell them that as taxpaying citizens of our communities, they have absolutely every right to talk to an elected official on the local or state level. And we give people the confidence to be able to do so, and share their stories in a meaningful and a powerful way. And so we have policy trainings. We have what's called the Freedom and Practice Academy, where we teach people about policy, how to advocate, how to message, how to write a bill, how to, do social media. And then we take people to actually lobby or advocate in Congress or in the state legislature. And for me, when I came home, it was one of the most powerful tools that helped me address my own trauma. Because when you think about trauma, you don't just think about PTSD. You think about being antisocial, lack of trust. Like it was, I couldn't even talk to women when I came home because of, certain dynamics. And so there's a lot of trauma, and not just from people that have been directly incarcerated, but family members, etc. That when you empower that trauma with, civic engagement opportunities, then I think people will take a different role in changing the current systems we have when people that are directly impacted are able to break through these barriers and have a seat at the table, when normally it's just been so hard to do so. So just something that I wanted to share from what Latino Justice is doing on trying to address extreme sentencing and at the same time overcome traumas by giving people tools they need to civically engage, um, with our work.
Yeah, yeah, it's so important. Thank you so much for that, just context, Michael, and just giving us an idea of like what that has looked like and your why for showing up consistently. And yeah, um, shifting over to Mona and just wanting to see from the lens of Equal Justice USA as well when it comes to policy, community engagement, like what that work looks like on y'all's end.
Yeah. I think, as we talked about, at AJ USA, we've learned a lot in our 30 years of really working to transform the justice system. As we know that justice steeped in punishment only causes more harm and more trauma. And, whether you work in the system, whether you interact with it, you have loved ones who've been through it, you live in a community that is over-policed and highly incarcerated, you have likely experienced harm and or trauma by the legal system. And I think one of the sharpest things that I think have just deeply understand is that, punishment, death penalty, extreme sentences, all of that. It's an ineffective response to violence. It's a response after violence happens. It does not do the work that supports healing from violence, both on the person who experienced violence and a person who caused violence. Um, that carceral system doesn't seek to interrupt it or even prevent it. Um, and, we know, and in doing our work, that people who are, are incarcerated in many cases were failed by adults and systems as children. And so, as we've really dug into our death penalty work, it's just been so clear that you can't just work to end a punishment system. Like, it is critically integral to connect those struggles together. And so important to grow policy that supports the safety of communities. We can't just take away a bad policy, because we know if we take that away, the state will just fill that vacuum with something else. And so we really have to work to pass and implement people-centered policy. And one of the things that we've really learned in our journey of, coming alongside communities, is that, communities have a vision where safety that goes beyond punishment. That's not just the absence of violence, but it's really at a place where our communities center the needs of people, both in the name of safety and in the name of healing. Um, can you go back to the video one slide before and play that video? Not this one. Let's see, that one. Yes, this one. So this is go ahead and play the video.
My mission in leading the Office of Violence Prevention and Trauma Recovery is ultimately to be able to have us do this work from a place of healing, right? And so we talk about trauma, we talk about crime, we talk about violence, but what are the solutions, right? What do we do? And so this office was built, I am in this space for about a year now, but prior to that, I've been doing this work in the wake of the George Floyd protests. In every city, the police department budget is the biggest budget, right? And so they have a $230 million budget. But we have organizations, community who are fighting to stay afloat, who can't pay their workers, but they are first responders as well. They're out there helping as well. When they're at the scenes, we're at the scenes. They're at the hospital, we're at the hospital. We're at the funerals, we're at the families' houses. So being able to see it from some place of equity where we are first responders too, we get to professionalize the work. We get to be able to be paid living wages as well. If law enforcement is being paid and they get to have overtime and they get all of this, then there has to be some equity in this for us as well. And so my office represents that. Everyone doesn't need to be arrested, right? We can't arrest our way out of this. Law enforcement is not the answer for everything. A lot of the times we have crime and violence. Again, the public health issue is under mental health issues, social emotional issues, quality of life issues, right? Poverty, all of those things, right? Get into the root causes of why we have crime and violence, why we have repeat victims, why we have repeat offenders, and law enforcement is not asking the questions why, right? And so you gotta have people who are gonna ask why, and beyond why, what can we do about it?
Join the movement to build community-centered public safety ecosystems. Sign up at norksafety.org to learn more and begin building in your city.
So what Keisha is really, talking about here is the way that, in so many neighborhoods and cities, the presence of traditional institutions, police, courts, prisons, etc., those systems often bring more questions and hurt than answers. And so in some of the work that we are really doing is, instead of equating safety just with these systems of punishment and control, we are really leaning in with communities to speak of this experience of safety as both a sense of well-being, a place where individuals thrive, a place where children are able to dream without bounds, where families can build futures together, right? It's a world where safety is experienced when basic needs are met, when community bonds are strong, um, and when supports like education, healthcare, and economic supports are both like robust and accessible. And so Keisha talked about a public safety ecosystem, and you all, just a note, right? The word ecosystem is real popular right now, and one of the reasons why we started using it, and I think it continues to persist, is that like the word ecosystem really speaks to a complex system that is able to just work together and understand itself. And so through the course of our work, we've really developed a framework for what the ingredients are of a public safety ecosystem. So there are like 4 buckets that you see on the screen here: social and cultural, community-led strategies, political will, and system-led strategies. So I'm just going to break them apart pretty quickly, and then we'll show a final quick video. So one, in the social cultural bucket, and I think this is the one that often feels what I think of as the squishiest, right? It's about really seeing that collective community identity. Every community has an identity about itself, that pulls in a history, whether it's a painful history, whether it's a triumphant history. Inside the social cultural bucket, we see not just this identity, but the way in which community loves each other. Every community loves on each other in both like similar and different ways. Sometimes it's because of the geographic place that you are, the way that community gathers and celebrate between music and food. We see a persistence of spirit of innovation, whether that's artists, folks trying to try new things. Another piece inside this bucket is that there are, or at least if not there are currently, but a willingness to have open channels of communication across different pieces of the community, and also a willingness to engage all of the community. I think as one thing that I think has not been directly said today, but I feel like has been part of the fabric of that, is that if we don't bring our entire community to the table, we aren't actually creating policy that is going to work for everyone. The second bucket of this is around community-led strategies for safety. And this is really like, having the community really drive what some of those strategies are. And these are strategies that don't center the police or the carceral system. So things like high risk intervention, street teams that are out in our street that are able to mediate, to prevent further violence, bringing folks like who are called credible messengers that are able to talk to folks And we are seeing street teams all across the country: Newark, New Jersey, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Denver, Patterson, New Jersey, Washington, D.C., Memphis, and many, many more. And we are really seeing violence start to come down as these high-risk intervention strategies are really able to just lower the temperature when things are really popping off. Inside this community-led strategies, we also see bridge building. So a willingness among the police and the communities to build bridges together and have hard conversations. One of the things that we've seen, particularly in Newark, New Jersey, is we've seen the police make small changes just based on feedback by the community. We also see healing-centered programs for youth development. Healing trauma is critical to both rebuilding lives, but there have to be resources for it. And not just resources, but resources that are culturally specific, resources that acknowledge both age, whether it's younger people or whether it's older people, right? I'm thinking about a space called The Hub, which is also in Newark, New Jersey. The Hub is a space designed by and for young folks, and it has a recording studio. It's got art space where young folks can come in. They've got mental health support. So folks are able to come in and talk to someone about what's happening in their lives, in their bodies, in their worlds, but then also to find ways to get to work through those emotions, whether it's in the studio, whether it's doing art. And so these kinds of things are so critically important. The third bucket is political and institutional will, which sometimes can be the hardest for those of us who work in politics. Like, politicians are very, very fickle. Political leadership, vision, and will are like a critical piece of this. And when we don't have elected officials that don't see the vision of bringing the community to the table, it does make it does make it harder. And we have to continue to do that work, whether it's to elect politicians who understand the importance of bringing communities to the table, or we have to continue pushing, because those policy changes are critical. You heard Director Yuri talk in the video. One of the things that happened in Newark, and this is a change that the mayor was able to lead, every time Newark hires 10 police officers, the Office of Violence Prevention is able to hire a social worker. And while it's not exactly where we want it to be, we're at least starting to move that direction. The last bucket is about systems-led strategies. And so this is understanding that while we need to center the needs of community to transform our systems, our systems actually do need to do some leading. One is there needs to be money. It's expensive to do this work. Cities, counties, and states have to be willing to do some coordination. As I'm sure you all know, at the state level, when there's like multiple grant programs, multiple pilot programs, if there isn't a coordinating body, both across the system sides and even on the community side, we start to see lots of snarls and challenges. So this could look like establishing offices of violence prevention at city and state levels that would assist driving dollars down to organizations at the city and the state level. This can look like, establishing offices in states' Health and Human Services Department, or Office of Emergency Services Department, that are able to help coordinate just across the systems. Then the other thing around, as I mentioned, coordinating bodies and budgetary support, like very specific city and state grant programs that are able to drive money to the ground. One example, California passed 2 years ago AB 28, which is a small excise tax on guns and ammunition. Those receipts will be used to fund a state grant program around violence intervention and prevention work, and also some school safety efforts. And just a note on the money, that we are in a very, I think, challenging time as far as money is concerned, right? Federal money is going away quickly. Federal money is state money, is local money. And I think one of the things that we've really learned is that, these money, it can't just come from one place. It can't just come from the city. It can't just come from the state. It also requires our foundations and philanthropy to lean in pretty substantially to actually make this work go and work. And I think if we can go for the last video, and then I'll be about to wrap up.
To me, public safety is
Public safety means
Public safety, I think that it's when
public safety is when the community is empowered.
is having everyone being able to participate in keeping the community safe.
It means, us coming together as a community, police, community, grassroots, the public, period.
When we talk about public safety, we're talking about the public playing a role in a redefined understanding of safety, a safety that's grounded in healing, a safety that's grounded in wellness.
that the people of its community, the institutions, the organizations, they have the quality of life that they deserve.
so that's like the public safety that I envision, where everyone is included in the process. That we're no longer like privatized, where the union makes all the decisions. So public safety, again, is when everyone is involved in the process.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you for that, Mona. And I will shift over to Josh.
Great, thank you. Well, yeah, as you know, I'm from the Bail Project. The Bail Project is a national nonprofit. We provide free bail assistance and pretrial support to thousands of low-income individuals every year. And then on the flip side of that, we try to drive policy advocacy at the local, state, and then national levels. That is driven by what we're seeing through our sort of on-the-ground support. Our ultimate mission is to replace cash bail with a system that's rooted in community and public safety and justice, real justice, rather than the current system, which is based on sort of retribution and wealth and discriminatory bias. Since the Bail Project's founding, we've posted bail for over 33,000 people. 92% of our clients, I think, returned all their court dates, even though they have no personal financial stake in the outcome. And I say that just to sort of highlight the fact that the Bail Project and other charitable bail funds or charitable bail organizations, I think, are really good evidence that like challenging the notion that cash bail is necessary for a functioning pretrial system, right? These numbers are the court return rate, for example, is comparable, if not better, to people who have posted bail and are out in the community. And it just really is, I think, evidence that people are coming back to court not because they have money at stake or because there's some financial imposition on them, but people come back to court because they want to resolve their case. They don't want a case hanging over their head. They don't want they want it to be resolved. And so I think they don't want to get new charges for a failure to appear. And anyway, I think this model is a good example of demonstrating that point. And we try to use those findings in our advocacy work to push for legislative and practice change that ultimately can reduce pretrial incarceration and center community-based support systems rather than punishment. So if you go to the next slide, I've done a little bit of this already, the sort of cash bail background, and already quoted that statistic about the 40% of people can't afford an emergency expense. But I'll just add on, like, this is or really just emphasize, I guess, like this is such a widespread part of the pretrial system. Every year there are 2.5 million people detained pretrial, and most of whom haven't been convicted of a crime, many of whom are held on minor charges. 68% of unconvicted detainees are accused of nonviolent offenses, such as nonviolent offenses, such as drug possession, petty theft, traffic violations, even. And the impact here really ripples out to all like it's such a web of oppression when somebody gets impacted by this part of the system, and really any part of the system. But time spent in pretrial detention means potential job loss or missed rent, missed utility payments, missed car payments, childcare instability, heightened risk of coercive plea deals, right? Somebody thinking, well, I can't afford my $500 cash bail, and they're offering me 6 months in jail when I've already been in jail for 4 months, and then I can just go home and, well, I might as well take it. And then you've got this conviction on your record when if you were able to go out into the community, be at home, be supporting, yourself and your family and getting the support you need in the community, maybe you're able to fight the charge. Maybe you're able to work your case more effectively, work with your lawyer more effectively. And yeah, I mean, I mentioned this, but the system the system actually undermines public safety, and because of these ripple effects. And the reality is that the way the system works right now is people with wealth can pay high bail amounts regardless of any other context, whereas people who are poor can't and are sort of de facto automatically detained in a lot of cases. And then I'll just flag this last point too. Like, this is an expensive system. Taxpayers spend more than $22 billion annually on pretrial incarceration. And I didn't, I alluded to this, but just want to emphasize pretrial incarceration. This means people who are awaiting trial. These are people who've been charged and detained, but in most cases haven't been convicted of anything in that particular case yet. And this is a vast spider web of impact here, based on that alone. If you go to the next slide, I'll part of the idea here, our model, and I'll talk about our sort of data and our examples, just because that's obviously what I have handy, but I think it's representative of community bail funds more broadly. These are groups that are able to disrupt the cash bail system, which results in this kind of two-tiered system of people with wealth and people without wealth. The bail project and other bail funds are able to post bail for people who can't afford it, and we provide, and many organizations provide, pretrial support that helps people when they're out in the community. And we're able to give people rides back to court, for example, or court reminders, or can help connect them to services in the community that they self-identified and that are voluntary, but that we can help shepherd a handoff to a housing support program if they need it, or mental health care, or different types of treatment they might need. And bail funds, I think there's been a lot of maybe recent conversation about bail funds and the sort of, and bail reform in general, I guess, in the kind of national political conversation. But these are really there's a long history of bail funds in this country, and they're really like a core part of modern American history, and especially in the world of social movements and the fight for civil rights. Some of the earliest bail funds go back to the first Red Scare in the 1920s, where the ACLU established one of the first large-scale bail funds in response to government crackdown on suspected communists and left-wing activists. But over the years, bail funds have really played a pivotal role in all sorts of social movements. So the mid-century civil rights movement, bail funds were a really key element of support in keeping that powered. More recently, a lot of bail funds were able to support activists during the George Floyd uprising. These are like an ingrained part of, I think, the movement for social justice. And as I alluded to, part of the beauty, I think, of these bail funds is that they can help demonstrate the broken nature of the status quo. So if you go to the next slide, I've got a couple, points here. Again, this is just our data because that's what I have most handy, but I think is representative of a broader trend with bail funds. We've supported 33,000 individuals across the country, and what the data tells us is cash bail is not needed for court appearance. Our clients return to court. Our clients want to resolve their cases. Our clients, like most people who are in the community while they await trial, if they miss their court date, it's because they got a last minute shift scheduled at work, or they weren't able to secure transportation at the last minute, or Often it's the result of a incredibly confusing court system that is difficult to navigate and often results in miscommunication about when a court date is or expectations about arriving. We know that cash bail undermines justice. Many of our clients are ultimately not convicted of any crime that they're charged with. About 30% of our clients have their cases ultimately dismissed, depending on the jurisdiction. And again, I raise that because it's evidence that these are people who otherwise would have been sitting in jail while they awaited trial, and may have felt compelled to take a plea deal while sitting in jail. And I say this again, not to tout our sort of impact here, but to say this is we've been able to help 33,000 clients. There are millions of other people who don't have access to bail funds in their community or wherever, who that 33% of people who otherwise would have their cases dismissed instead are forced to sit in jail while they await trial. And there have been studies. There's all these questions: does bail reform, do community bail funds impact public safety? Do they affect crime rates, court return rates, whatever? Study after study shows no, there's no impact on public safety. If anything, a lot of times cash bails is reform as we see a positive trend after the fact. But there's no strong correlation in the negative, certainly. So there's real evidence, I think, growing out of this kind of supportive community work that the system can work differently. I have a quick video. This is out of Florida, Dominic Fike, who's if folks aren't familiar, he's an actor, he's a musical artist, but he was detained in jail, in the Collier County Jail in Naples, and this is a video where we interview him, and he goes to bail somebody out with one of our bail disruptors. But they talk about the
Hi, my name is
of pre-trial incarceration and jail, and we can just watch the first, I think, 5 minutes of this for time. But
Dominic Fike, and I'm here with the Bail Project, and we are standing in front of the Collier County Jail, which I was previously incarcerated in, and today we're going to bail some people out of jail.
Yeah, it's so nice to meet you. We made a special trip down here to help you bail people out of the Collier County Jail in Naples. Like, how does that feel, like, just being back here?
It's weird. It's a lot less anxiety than you would think. I remember the day I was released from here. As soon as I walked out, I didn't feel anything. It's weird how it does that. But man, I mean, I'm excited to be here with you guys and meet you guys. I think what you're doing is incredible. I'd like to learn a little bit more about it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we're a national nonprofit, and we pay people's bail for free. So, we help people that are in jail just waiting for a court date. They haven't been convicted of anything. They're just waiting to have their day in court, and we set up a release plan for them after we pay their bail, so they have everything they need to get back to court. Text reminders, free rides to court, just so that they can fight their case from a position of freedom like anybody with money would do.
That's incredible. You would think that would be the job of like the people who kind of locked you up.
Right. You would think, yeah. I mean, bail was originally intended as an incentive to return to court, but now it's really just used to keep people without money behind bars. I mean, our work shows that you don't need money to return to court. Our clients return to over 90% of their court dates with no money on the line. So we're just trying to prove that point and use the work that we've been doing the past 5 years to make some change.
Incredible.
Yeah, but how was your experience being in jail?
It's overwhelming how many people are in jail. It's like when I got there, I was sort of like just taken back by how big of a system it was, how many people, how many families are dealing with their loved ones being in this cage, and kind of the conditions and how used to it like the cops are, the people holding you there are just sort of like stick and move, keep going one after another. It's like being on a product line sort of felt like a piece of meat. I mean, the whole process of being kind of roped into the system, constantly needing rides to get from this, building to go register here before you're arrested there, and then, I think that was the most tiring part, was kind of learning all the ins and outs of the system.
Yeah, the system is so confusing and alienating, and many people don't even know what their options are. And instead of trying to help you through that process, bail bondsmen come in and they're just worried about making a profit. We operate a national revolving bail fund that's completely funded through donations. We pay 100% of the bail directly to the court so that when someone's case closes, we get 100% of that money back and use it to help the next person.
Well, hats off to you guys. Yeah, I'm gonna keep it on because it's hot.
Please, I get it.
Hats off. Actually, I don't know that I was bailed out. I think my parents were also in jail, and I didn't have friends with money at the time. Again, it was like a learning, like I really had, and everyone is so well versed in it. They're kind of moving too fast for you to like ask them what these things mean, and if you do, you're kind of looked at as like an idiot. I'd heard the terms like plea deal and things like on TV.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when you're in court and they're asking you these serious fucking questions, you're like, oh my God.
You're like, wait, do I really know what that is?
Yeah, like, wait.
Actually, what are my options?
Seriously,
Yeah.
that's kind of how it was like for me, my experience. It was sort of like I was just constantly trying to grab a hold of, the situation. Because of kind of my lack of knowledge, I think that's what contributed to my, incarceration after going to so many court dates and jumping through so many hoops. And I was in there for a little bit, a little under a year probably. So I kind of had people on the outside, waiting. And I had a girlfriend. Can't beat that, you know what I mean? She would send me money and nice messages. And
Yeah, I mean, that's something that people don't think about, if you don't have any support. And
a lot of people don't.
Right.
A lot of people don't have anything. I saw a lot of people that were going through it.
No, you're right. I mean, it affects so many people. Like on any given night, nearly 500,000 people are sleeping in jail cells, a lot of them just because they can't afford their bail. Instead of waiting for their day in court, a lot of them are forced into taking plea deals just to go home.
For real, I actually did that. I didn't want to fight at all. So we were just like, yeah, anything, whatever you'll give me, as long as it's not 5 years, whatever you'll give me, that will make this done. You know what I mean? That's the crazy part, is they sort of scare you into incarceration half the time, because they'll be like, well, if you don't, take this plea, then there's a chance that you'll lose and you'll end up here longer. And also, there's just going to be a continuation of these court dates and the stress that that's going to bring, and that stress is going to add on to whatever stress is already kind of present in your life, which is I don't know. Down here, it's just like, God.
Yeah, thank you for managing the cutting there. Well, anyway, so I'll just very quickly go through, we can skip over maybe this and get into the next slide here, just the sort of case study. But I just want to highlight how I think seeing this work and growing out of our sort of direct support and how a lot of this work can grow into advocacy work. So all of our advocacy work is sort of grows as much as possible organically out of what our bail disruptors who are posting bail and what our clients are seeing on a daily basis. And that's how we sort of learn what pressure points are there in the system that are going to have the most impact if they're changed. And I think there's a real model for that kind of work. If you just get to the next slide, sorry, real quick, I just want to highlight Illinois is a great example of this. Illinois was the first state to fully eliminate cash bail a few years ago. And I just want to highlight this as a case study, not only because they have enacted the strongest example of bail reform in recent years, but also the way that their model was developed and the support was built out. It really grew from local effort. And I think it's really a great example of how local reform and the community-based support can lead to bigger and bigger change. It can snowball into something really dramatic. So much of the work done to change the system in Illinois grew out of work in Chicago. In particular, holistic defense models and mutual aid leading to broader organizing around the pretrial system led to an ordinance in the Cook County that dramatically reduced the use of cash bail in the county. And all of that sort of built to grow into statewide legislation 4 years later. And so I think it's really important to recognize that what maybe makes the news a lot of the time is this sort of big Illinois eliminates cash bail, but leading into that, the build up to things like that so often are organizers, people in communities, people pursuing hyper-local reform, and seeing what works and having that grow out to something bigger. So I'll end there. But thanks for letting me walk through that.
Beautiful. Thank you, Josh. And I will kick it over to Seth.
Thanks, Saskia. At the Innocence Project of Florida, our primary mission is to find individuals in prison in Florida who are wrongfully convicted and free them. And we've had a lot of success doing that. We freed 34 people who spent 772 years in prison for combined for crimes they didn't commit. So through that work, we've had a lot of interaction with individuals, both who we haven't been able to get out of prison, but also those we have and their families. It became clear to us, like early on in the process, that we were a small kind of ragtag group of lawyers, that we weren't really equipped to assist our clients after they got out of prison. And also we had continuing responsibilities to our current clients who are still in prison and all the people we were trying to find in order to get out in the future. And so we, very early on in 2006, realized that we needed to add a social services transition services component to our work. We hired our first social worker in 2006 to develop these local networks of service providers in different locales where our freed clients live, in order to help them successfully transition into free society. And really, for most of our clients, in Florida, we've had like really long incarcerations that we've gotten people out after, not 8 years, or we had a couple of those, but really like 25, 35, 40, or a bunch over 40 years. And as you can imagine, the world's completely different when you get out than when you left before. The bonds with family are broken. Many people's families, most of their key family members have died. They're alienated from family, from close relationships, from their communities. In Florida, we have over 4 dozen prisons, and they're kind of all over in rural areas in Florida. So people are in cages far away from their families. And so like our entire goal with this process was to really try to smooth the transition as best as we could, to be able to help our clients create stability in all manners and all aspects. Everything from financial stability, access to quality health care. I mean, Michael, I imagine you know this personally, but all of our clients come out of prison with effed up teeth. Medical care is bad, like bad. They all come out with glasses that have, probably needed to be changed like 10 years previous, so their eyes are all messed up. And lack of access to psychological care, right? Therapeutic care, to work through the trauma that, not just from incarceration, but the exacerbated trauma of wrongful incarceration. And so we're working to provide all of that to make sure our clients have a safe roof over their head, access to health care, access to public benefits, job training and job assistance, access to education, and really just to help them identify and realize their dreams. Michael, you talked about giving people a voice, or in your case, you talked about the program giving people training and access to just normal civics, to give them a platform to make change. And some of the work that Saskia and I have been doing, mostly Saskia more recently, is helping our clients build skills around storytelling and public speaking in order to be able to go out in the community and be able to tell their stories. And while that in itself sometimes can be traumatic, it's also important to not try to move around trauma, but move through it, address it directly. And for many of our clients, it's really not only cathartic to directly address this worst thing that's ever happened to them, but to also feel like they're making an impact. And for the first time, maybe in their life since they've gotten out of prison, be able to tell their story in their own words without it being filtered through someone else who's trying to paint them into a monster. And so that's really important. We've worked really hard to build community among individuals who are freed wrongfully convicted people, but also connect them with individuals who have spent, a long time in prison, whether wrongfully or not. Because one thing we've heard from so many of our clients is that, like, when they get out, there's not there's not a lot of opportunities to build community with people who understand their experience. And so we try to bring, well, one, get our clients, and we have a lot of freed wrongfully convicted people here in Florida because we not only get all the snowbirds here, but we get everybody else's freed clients moving to Florida, and we take them into our freed wrongfully convicted family. We want to organize those people both so they can provide aid and support to each other, but they can organize and find ways to be impactful in their communities, and then also connect them with the broader community of freed wrongfully convicted people by, like, for example, bringing them to the Innocence Network conference, where you have like 400 wrongfully convicted people from all over the world who come, and it's like this crazy experience to understand that this is something that happens, and I know who my brothers and sisters are. I know who I can reach out to, I can meet, who I can depend on. And this is a particularly acute. We've had a couple female clients who we've helped free, and it's especially acute for them because there's not a lot, so much of the focus on men, and there's not a lot of resources out there for women who were incarcerated, and particularly wrongfully incarcerated. And we just sent one of our former clients to a leadership summit of freed wrongfully convicted women in California. So similar, Michael, what you're talking about, she can find ways to connect with people who have a very specific experience like she did, and find ways to come together and be impactful. We work with organizations to get, I mentioned dental care, like how important is a smile, right? It's like so important. It's the first impression that people have of you. And yet all of our clients come out, I said, with effed up teeth. And we've worked with another organization to help secure over like $150,000 of free dental care for our clients, so they can feel confident, right? When they go out and they meet people, go for job interviews, do public speaking. And the last thing I guess I'll say is that, I mean, this is really like hard work, and it's not all peaches and cream. Some of our clients have continued to struggle with the revolving door of incarceration. Struggled with, although there's chaos in prison, there's some order to it as well, and they come out and the world is more complex and more chaotic. And we really try to work with our clients to simplify as best they can, so they can kind of move beyond that chaos, keep life organized, and keep life focused. So it is a continued struggle for some, but we're always there for them. And I think that's the most important thing. As long as we're around and they're around and want the assistance, we'll continue to help them to not only find or refine that stability, but continue to heal from the trauma of incarceration and wrongful incarceration.
Yeah, thank you for that, Seth. I'm really grateful for all of y'all's kind of like reflections on what the work looks like on the ground on a daily basis, what it has looked like since the inception of each organization, and really appreciate the vastness of it, while also knowing that like we are in solidarity with one another for this like shared vision of like what we can build and what it can look like. So we're gonna shift. I know we're coming up on time, and there are a couple questions that I want to field and propose to y'all. But as we move towards that, I want to ask, like, what does real solidarity look like when working across these different communities of struggle, and like what should folks leave this space um, with in the sense of like, what do we do next? Like, where do we go from here? Like, how can we contribute or learn more? Or what do you want folks to leave this space with? And whoever feels led can jump right in.
I mean, I very briefly just say that the thing, we've had a number of these conversations over the last year that are on slightly different topics, and it's an opportunity to find ourselves in a panel with people from different organizations who are doing work that's like concentric circles in relation to each other. And it always strikes me that all of this is like sort of different slices of the same piece of fruit, if you will. We're all kind of in it together, just kind of, next to each other, facing each other, overlapping with each other. And I think someone mentioned it before, like the thing that I want people to take away from this is to one, find the people who you can partner with, to follow their lead or to lead them along, to work together to address these problems. And we don't have to be siloed. We can find sisterhood, brotherhood, and work together, but also kind of allow the folks who are most impacted by these problems to be the voices and the faces of like the human side of these problems. I mean, the thing that has most struck me over the years is that we've made so much progress on remedying aspects of the criminal legal system here in Florida simply by like humanizing people who are wrongfully convicted and bringing them to legislators' offices and getting them to realize that there's just people who had this terrible thing happen to them. Oh, and by the way, they were also convicted of crimes they did commit beforehand. And yes, you're going to pay them $2 million for the time they're wrongfully incarcerated, and you're going to be happy to do it. And everyone's going to cry and we're going to have a kumbaya moment because that's a person. And like when you can do that, you can maybe begin to cut through some of the groupthink and the caricaturing and the dehumanizing by appropriately granting people a humanity and dignity that they deserve and putting faces to problems. Is when we start kind of like erasing people from the equation that it becomes easier to use these policies and laws and as tools of oppression. So we need to continue to center the people who are most impacted and make sure that the people who are doing these things see them.
Yeah. Really quickly, as I want everyone to answer this, but I also wanted to remember that Mona had sent a number of resources, and I wanted to provide that in the chat for folks.
Yeah, I was just gonna to sort of to add on to that a little bit. I think something I am always trying to keep in mind too is like when like real partnership, what real partnership means, I guess. I think it can be easy to go to somebody and when I'm talking to say our bail disruptors or our clients and trying to figure out what they're seeing and how that can grow into maybe an advocacy campaign. I think it can be easy to go into those conversations with a preconceived notion of what they might say, and then go and sort of say, "I'm seeing this and this. Do you think these are problems?" But what actually is sort of I found over and over and over again what produces much deeper partnership and much more collaboration and ultimately better results is approaching those conversations with an attitude of what are you seeing? What do you see as the problem? Rather than, coming and sort of asking for confirmation about what I'm already, what I'm already thinking. That's just kind of one example, but I think it's, you know, I think a lot of people approach partnership across different communities of struggle with this idea towards, well, we just need to sort of make a connection. And I've got my goals and they've got their goals, and we can find where the overlap is and, push forward together. But I think it's, where possible if to try and sort of start organically and think about like, let's not think about what I want to do and where your work is overlapping, but like tell me about your work and maybe I can lean into that. I don't know, thinking about those partnerships more creatively, I guess, is to me something that's proven to be really valuable.
Yeah, I agree with all of these things. And when I put my organizer hat on, I think about, moving in a power with perspective. And it also means continually asking the question, who is not at the table, and making sure that we fill those seats. If we're working on, if we're working on the issue around, a particular piece of incarceration, like, do we have people who have experienced that sitting with us at the table to make the decision about what that legislation should or could look like, or to develop the organizing around that. And so I think for me, it's about, like I look at our job and our work is to accompany communities. Like we don't roll in to a community with a prescription. Like we roll in with like, okay, let's work together to figure out how we can move to the next place. So I think for me, the watchword is like power with, and accompany side by side that work with the folks we're working with.
I love that, Mona. I haven't heard that one before. I think what I would add is, when I think about working in solidarity with, with people, um, I think about meeting each other where we're all at. I think about, we just talked about various different aspects of the criminal justice system, and it's a big beast, and we're not going to change it overnight. And so I think that, being patient with each other and constantly communicating with each other, I think is really, really important, because we all have a difference of strategy. We all have a difference of timeline. But there's just so many factors that we're going to have to push through, just to make some positive changes in this monstrous system. So I always am a big advocate of meeting people where they're at, being patient, being kind to one another, because it's not easy work to do.
Yeah,
I
no,
think the one thing that I just want to add, just Michael, to what you just said, is that the work isn't easy. And, sometimes it feels like we lose a lot before we win, but each time we don't win on a bill, we move forward a little bit more. And it's, that persistence, that willing to come back to the table is the thing that gets us those durable wins.
yeah, absolutely. No, all of that is beautiful, and I'm really grateful for all of the wisdom that has come out of this conversation, and it's came upon us so quickly, and we're coming up on time. But I wanted to make space as we close out for each of y'all to maybe say how folks can keep in touch with the organization or yourself, or any just final thoughts as we come to a close.
You want to know how
No,
folks can keep in touch with us?
yeah.
Okay, so you can reach us at the Innocence Project of Florida at our website, Florida Innocence, all one word, all spelled out, .org. Lots of really great information on the website about individuals we've helped free, current cases, legislation we're working on. We have a blog, where we, are really doing more long form discussions about issues related to wrongful convictions. And you can find us on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter at _innocence, where we're doing, more moment to moment communications.
Yeah, I'll share in the chat this is my email, and then our website. Our website also, we have a lot more, we have a lot of client stories, a lot of additional videos, as well as information about how a lot of that is translating to our advocacy work and other sort of research and publications we're doing and things like that. So there's a lot to learn, I think, on our website if you're interested in learning more. And yeah, definitely, as is relevant to this conversation, definitely I highly recommend checking out a lot of the client stories, because I think they're really illustrative of what's going on. And yeah, I guess just in terms of like a call to action, I would encourage you to look. A lot of communities have small community bail funds. And I would encourage you to maybe check out, see if there's one nearby if you're interested in sort of getting involved. And whether it's just through donations or a lot are asking for volunteers or whatever. But I think that's a way to really provide like strong mutual aid in your community. And if there is one in your area, definitely something to look into.
Beautiful.
I also dropped my information in the chat, and I think certainly also an invitation. I know myself and Michael, I know you're involved in some state coalitions. If you're interested in doing some of this work in coalition with other organizations and individuals, please reach out. I see some Californians in the chat who are doing violence intervention work, and I help co-chair the California Violence Intervention Prevention Coalition. So please reach out. I'd love to connect you to that. Michael and I also participate in a California Anti-Death Penalty Coalition. So please, and I know we're all connected with states across the country. So we're happy to make that connection to those state coalitions. And yeah, Saskia dropped a bunch of info in the chat from us as well. So yes, Autumn, send me an email.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Want to honor folks' time. I know folks want to eat and get ready for what is going to be tomorrow. Thank you for joining us in this space. We will continue to have these conversations and just build power and really like imagine something different and build that. So thank you all and have a wonderful night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.